Welcome to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nick King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox. And together we're here to explore, understand and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course. Hello and welcome. This week we are going to be looking at self-employment, which for many of us neurodivergent people is the way forward. It's certainly the way that both me and Nick exist, although it hasn't always been. So we're going to look at the pros and the cons overall. And actually, well, yeah, Nick, do you think that self-employment is the way forward for many neurodivergent people?
I think for a lot of us, I don't think I'm employable. I really don't. I think, people can employ me to work with me for short periods of time. And we can do collaboration for small periods of time. And even people who I work on the long basis. So I have a colleague that I've worked for coming up 5 years now, or worked with, should I say. And where because it's sort of like occasionally, like once a month or like for small periods of time, I think that works particularly well. And we really, really get on. That also helps. But no, I don't think I could have a job. I did used to have a job training for a training company, but I wasn't. They wouldn't have, said that I was a good employee.
Really? In what way?
I think they found me difficult. I think, you do the things, don't you? You do the, I don't know, the pointing out things that are wrong in a social justice kind of way, or just in it's wrong, and you say it out loud, and they don't tend to like that. And then there's hierarchies in offices, aren't they? And then like interpersonal relationships that you don't understand, where like, the manager and the HR director's cousins or something, or married, or I don't know, and then you don't know, and then you get it wrong.
And it's funny actually that, I'm remembering when I used to be a radio journalist. I worked in radio stations. There was a particularly infamous moment where the radio station I was working at had been through a lot of upheaval. There was a meeting of the whole radio station, and there was this box that you put questions in, and the name of the box, the title of the box was Daft, Dumb and Dangerous, because they were the questions that you could put in the box. They'd borrowed this from American radio corporate culture. Okay. Now, the actual etiquette was not to ask dangerous questions, even though it said Daft, Dumb and Dangerous. I got on the box. But I, having witnessed everyone be in utter trauma from the upheaval that had been happening among the personnel and management of the radio station for several months, and everyone was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, I decided I was going to ask my question, and it was not going to be a question in the box because that was cheating. I was going to ask it out loud. So I out loud asked in front of everyone and the programme manager and the managing director, how are you going to deal with the fact that morale has been so low in the past few months? And it was like this, whoa, I had named the unnameable thing and said the unsayable thing. And the programme manager gave some sort of guffy answer. But afterwards, I was a bit of I'd gone from being someone who basically didn't talk to anyone because, like you, I never had any idea what was going on or, what the interactions were really. I just quietly got on with writing news bulletins. Suddenly I was a bit of a heroine, actually, because I'd taken on. But it was only because, it was the social justice thing and the saying it truthfully. And actually, having no regard for whether I then was employed by any of
Yeah.
those people ever again. And that is really difficult. I suppose I had been thinking that maybe one of the things that makes it difficult to be employed, or many of the things are logistical, like, you'll get burned out through the long hours, or, I mean, that certainly has also been the case for me, but I didn't used to know. But I think you've hit the nail on the head actually around like, the struggling with hierarchies, interpersonal relationships, the kind of getting on and networking and the things you're supposed to do. Um,
And
yeah,
obviously when you're self-employed, you have the agency over your relationship. So if I had somebody who I was no longer enjoying working with or for, definitely not you, but like you would just stop. Whereas if you were employed, somebody else is dictating who is around you. It's a bit like school, isn't it? You know, the 30 people who live within a 5 mile radius of you who were born in the same year. It's sort of like that. You can't manage or control who you're around and how that might work.
absolutely. And then you also often in employment cannot control your physical environment. And again, that's where I would greatly struggle. To be in a noisy office or an open plan office. Again, for me, when I was in radio, I kind of ended up working it so that I was doing shifts, either very early shifts, which was difficult because I hate getting up early, but there were a lot fewer people in the office,
Mm.
or weekend shifts when there was no one in the office. I basically accidentally made it so I had most of the time the quiet working environment that I really need. I mean, it was more than a fluke because it was a need, but I just wasn't aware why I had that need, if you see what I mean. And I was able to fulfill it. But I feel for, imagine someone who's sensitive to lights, who is working in a supermarket all day for hours, and
Mm.
yet that is having on them. Oof.
I can remember working somewhere once where we moved from like quite a small office to one of these sort of new big supposedly fantastic glass buildings where it's pretty much just mirrored everywhere and the light bounces everywhere and the noise bounces everywhere and they're meant and then they're like, look at this amazing thing that you've done for us, and you're like, no, thank you. And then obviously if you say that, if you voice that, then you're ungrateful, aren't you? Or you're negative, or you're difficult, or you're pick a label.
Absolutely. So I think we will talk more about
Yes.
employment and the pitfalls of it in a future
Yes.
podcast. But for now, let's come back to self-employment then. Now we've established
Why?
why. And
Why?
so
Why?
this can be a great thing. I mean, I know for actually, maybe not coincidentally, in both of our families, it was actually encouraged as a path, wasn't it? Didn't your granddad say to you?
Yes, absolutely. Don't work for anyone else. Yeah, never ever. And I should. God, if I'd listened to him sooner. But yeah, I think there is something about ND people where not only do we have sort of like a persuasive need for agency and autonomy, but that is actually that drive is what makes self-employment work, because you've got to want to do it. It's not the easy way.
It's not the easy way. And I want to make a bit of a distinction, even though I'm both as an ADHD person. I think there is certainly a culture and a recognition, actually, now among some entrepreneurs that ADHD is a particularly desirable quality to have because you are self motivated. The excitement of doing your own deal or selling your own thing or meeting your own deadlines
Mhm.
gives you that dopamine high that you need. Also, the troubles with fulfilling the requirements of employers. But conversely, what that then gives you as a self-employed person, and I definitely struggle with this, it gives you admin that you have to
Yeah.
do yourself, and forms and
Taxes.
taxes and creating your own structure. And actually, so I would say for many neurodivergent people, self-employment is really a bad idea for those reasons. It's much better to have a structure and certainty and not these additional things. I would say for me, it's probably turned out that, on balance, I can only be self-employed, really. So I have to put up with the other stuff. And I now, at the moment, do have some help with that because of access to work.
I was just about to say that list is exactly where I spend my access to work hours. The admin-y, bookkeeping, taxi, like the stuff that actually means you can run a business. Again, like we were talking about in the last podcast, the output that somebody else needs. Is almost entirely managed by somebody else within my company or other people. There's several of them, but that is exactly where my access to work hours goes. It goes into the paperwork and the forms and the bookkeeping and a level of communication. Absolutely, that is where it goes. But I don't think everyone knows that when you're self-employed, you can get access to work.
No, and I know a lot of people still struggling through. So as a quick summary, it's a benefit payable from the UK government that allows you to have certain aids, which might be people, might be things. So for people with physical disabilities, it might be maybe a kind of remodeling of an office, for example, to
Or
make
even a chair. This is an access to work chair.
Really?
Because I have a bad back.
Oh, very good. And I could get, but I haven't sorted it out yet because it comes under the category of, I'm more faffing about. But I can get one of those iPads that has software on that does a special thing.
It's a remarkable.
That's it.
Yes.
But it's all, I'd have to learn how to do it. So again, all accommodations can come with their own traumas, but overall it's all worth it. So yeah, I now, since the end of, I've had it before in the past and then I let it go during the pandemic and I got it again now. And I basically get 8 hours of support from a PA and 2 Ubers a week, which is amazing. And the remarkable that I haven't got. So yes, I mean, I'm still. I think Nick, you make better use of this, or you've been more happily engaged in having this help than I have. I'm still bedding into what it means, and sometimes the help is actually a bit of a hindrance. But anyway,
The demand is what it is. However, I've got a really good agency who I use, and they've taken as much of those demands off me as they can. And any demands that were there, they used to jump on like Zooms and body double with me to like do the bits that they literally couldn't do for me when like somebody demands that it's actually you. But yeah, things like, because my spine's also wrecked and I've got hypermobile ADS. So I've got physical stuff as well. So I've got like an anti-fatigue mat and my monitor moves and this chair. It's a heated one. It's very pleasant. I know. And I don't need the Ubers, I don't need the driving. But I get a lot of help with my bookkeeping, I get help with my socials, I get help with sort of like emotional support, because quite a lot of the training that I do can be quite hard hitting. And you need sort of help with that. But absolutely, I recommend, and although I absolutely am on board with the process is like any process through the government, it's hard and sometimes I feel deliberately difficult. But in the end, I've found it really worth it. And I actually wouldn't have been able to do my taxes in this January this year if I hadn't had help from my person who literally came and did shoulder to shoulder, one-to-one support with me while I did it. And I do mean literally sat on my shoulder whilst I did it, because otherwise that was not getting done.
No, and kind of similar, although mine was done in more bits and pieces. And I have to say, compared to a process like applying for PIP or even possibly universal credit, while not a completely super duper easy process, actually, I found it both times I've had it to be relatively straightforward. Actually, there is a bit of a waiting list. I noticed that a writer that I know has now also through an agency got her access to work, and she's got admin support. And she said something online about how they do things like they have singing and rewards during their body doubling session. So presumably they've worked out that basically she needs it to be fun in order to do it. And she was saying that her support worker had said to her, what's your bank address? And I could imagine her doing this as well. She'd put her head on her desk and gone, I don't know. Why would I know my bank address? Why would I know this? And her support worker had just gone, it's okay. We'll leave this section blank and I'll come back to that. And it's that kind of like that calm, isn't it? That actually can be invaluable with these difficult processes. I also actually, talking of Ubers, I feel like a lot of the Uber drivers that I take drives with are a lot of ADHD Uber drivers. And I think they need, or taxi drivers generally, drivers. I think that's very neurodivergent friendly to be able to keep your own hours, to be able to have your own schedule. A lot of cafe owners are ADHD, I think.
I think there's something in the agency to it, isn't it? And controlling your life in terms of like, so, how much work that you do in one day to how much work you do in the next day. And I'm like, I quite regularly put in sort of 12, 14-hour days. But then I take the next day off. Do you know what I mean? Then I plan nothing for the next day. And people are like, oh, I don't know how you can like still be work at 9 o'clock at night when you start at 8:30 in the morning. I'm like, I'm fine. I mean, I'm caffeinated, I'm fine. But I think this idea, sort of the idea of the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
That's so long. Imagine so long. And that you have to be where someone else wants you to be all that time. And you might not have work to do all that time. And you just be there pointlessly. Oh my God. That's the other thing. The boredom, or I'm here at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday when I could be somewhere else. And also, I've done all my jobs now, or there's no work, or it's quiet, or whatever it is. That I wouldn't be able to pretend. I mean, there's a book by the anthropologist David Graeber, and the title is Bullshit Jobs. And he's essentially talking about these quite made-up jobs that capitalism has created that are ultimately quite pointless in varying degrees and ways. And again, to actually sit in a job and think there's no
job.
There's either no job or no purpose to this. That's very difficult for and I have to say, so I want to evoke a phrase that I think you and I have to evoke quite often between us, neurodivergent privilege, because there is a degree of privilege, potentially, neurodivergent privilege, to being able to be self-employed if you can be, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
As in, that's not an option that's available to everyone because of insurmountable accessibility issues, even though that will be so much better for them. So I just keep thinking, oh, thank God.
And also, not everyone's skill set's available for capitalism, It's just not.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean you're not. Well, this is the idea that you're not contributing to life, society, yourself. But yeah, you also have to have a skill that can be capitalized to be employed and pay the bills.
And actually, so we never say this word quite rightly, but I'm going to tell you about a email that I haven't replied to. That's bad. So school asked me, would you send our college a short video telling them about how your neurodiversity is your superpower?
Oh, no.
If you could do that in time for Neurodiversity Week, that'd be lovely. And I was like, that's very presumptuous. And it's not my superpower. And certain aspects of it sometimes, it's brilliant that I'm, useful with words. That is very helpful. It means I'm able to fit into a capitalist system in a country that's got a subsidised arts sector, hurrah. But I'm not going to talk to you about superpowers. So how I dealt with that was to not respond, which is not right. I have to respond, but I don't want to get into the whole thing. I want to get into the thing.
You are wrong about superpowers. I went into a school who has a very significant, it's got 2 arms units, it's got a very significantly high number of young disabled or neurodivergent children in. And I went in to talk about being autistic and being self-employed there. And I was sort of telling them that, the benefits of making your own hours and not having to wear uniform. And we need to come back to that. And sort of choosing your own relationships and doing something that you love. I do like the concept of doing something that you wouldn't get paid for because you love it. I'm not saying I don't want to be paid, pay me. But like not working for free. Don't tell me what to do. Oh, it's all of it, isn't it? That's properly riled me, that stuff that you said. But yeah, I went in and I talked to these little kids because I do think it's important, because I think, again, this sort of the capitalist thing that you were sold as a young person, a teenager, an adult, is that, education, do a degree, get a job, die. But it's not. That's not necessarily what life looks like. Can we get on to uniforms? I can't.
Well,
Could you imagine having to wear a uniform? It wasn't sensory
no,
friendly.
no, that oof,
No.
exactly. Itchy. So school uniforms was the last. I've never had a job where I had to wear a. Oh yes, I have. I've just remembered. Oh God, this was my worst employment experience. I was an air tours entertainer, the equivalent of a Butlins red coat in an all-inclusive hotel in Tunisia. I don't know if I can convey to you how unsuitable a job that was for an autistic 21-year-old person. Um, but at least the uniform was quite comfy. It was like just a red, like a red sweater type thing and blue shorts. I think that wasn't too bad. But yeah, school uniforms, itchy collar, tight tie. So you've worn them in
In
jobs.
jobs, yeah. So I had a few in my early 20s uniformed jobs. Do you know what I remember most out of all of them? Trousers that didn't fit properly and weren't made of cotton.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
quite against. I tend to wear dresses as a rule if I'm sitting down, because I don't like things touching my waist or feeling like they're digging in places. I also can't do things touching my wrists. You've got look wrists, free the wrists. It's got to be a really good day for something to be touched, because this is actually long sleeved, but it's never been long sleeved in its life. Because the idea that you have to wear a sort of like a long sleeve shirt and a tie for work would stop me being employed.
And yeah, and again, as the individuality thing. I mean, many of us neurodivergent people, we love bright colours and bright prints, as we both do. Might colour our hair. I mean, the idea that you would not get to have your hair, this fundamental thing that is part of you, that you would not be. Someone else would tell you what to do with your hair. No, no, no. Just can't quite. Mm. But
Did
again,
you
it's
ever have an office? I think since 2020, it's become really, really normalized for, if you're self-employed, that you work from home.
yeah.
Um, but I think before that, a lot of self-employed people I knew had offices, and they rented an office because they felt that they had to have an office as a place of work.
To go to, yeah, absolutely. And no, that's not. I mean, I do have
Okay.
plenty of friends who would maybe rent some studio space, and there is something about the difficulty of working at home, which is a thing. That's why I did just go off and spend a couple of weeks finishing a book in Portugal. Tax deductible. Maybe it is tax deductible. Ooh, anyway, that's a whole separate thing. But yeah, and I suppose at least you can make. I used to fantasize that if I worked in a university, which again, it's not. It's a pity. I'm a flipping, though I say it myself, brilliant academic and researcher and teacher, but I can't work in a university environment with all those people and the
Structures.
rules and the prescriptions and the admin. I just can't do it. But I did have a little fantasy. If I'd been posh, I could have had a little office in Cambridge or Oxford, a little tiny office where I served people sherry and afternoon tea, and it was all book lined and smelled of wood, and looked over the quad and the trees. And I spent a lot of time there on my own with no students or anything. That's apparently not really a thing anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
A thing.
If you weren't spending time with the students, who were you giving that sherry to? Do we need to like do an intervention?
Oh, good point. And I don't really drink actually, so but there is nonetheless sherry quite importantly in this fantasy. Maybe the caretaker who probably has the porter. That's it, the porter. Um, he'd come over and we'd have a lovely chat sometimes, and I'd give him sherry off my little tray. Again, that life has sadly gone. So it's not often I wish to be posh or to have been in it, but for that fantasy, yes.
Do you think there is something in that, how often controlling how often you are around others?
Hugely. Oh God, yeah. I mean, the thought that you would have to be exposed all the time to people, but then at the same time, the sad thought that maybe you might work somewhere where you're quite isolated and you're really not getting to interact with people at all. But I mean, both of those things are difficult, aren't they? Or can
It's
be.
something that I changed, I say fairly recently, it was probably about 18 months ago now. I very much actively decided that I needed a bit of a sort of a community of I don't know, community of practice. I don't know, is that a thing?
Mm.
But essentially colleagues who are in the same place, also self-employed and essentially alone. But sometimes you're doing really difficult work when you work with like autistic families, autistic young people. Sometimes, they're incredibly vulnerable and you can't disassociate from that completely, even though I can quite a lot. Not in a bad way, just in a sort of you've got to leave work at work sometimes kind of way. But sometimes you hear really sort of upsetting things and you need that support. And sometimes I think that's the hard bit, like, when you don't have colleagues, when you don't have other people that you work with. When it's hard, you're alone and it's hard.
And actually, yeah, you don't have a sounding board or kind of reassurance, or probably even, I'm going to then say, co-regulation. And actually, one of the ways that people co-regulate nervous systems is just by talking
Yeah.
or being in the same space. So yeah, I absolutely get that. And in fact, that has been one of the things in having my PA that has at points been really nice to have someone to talk things through with and to
Mm.
have to plan with. And I'm saying at points, it's just because I find the body doubling quite tiring. I would probably prefer to do less body doubling
Mm.
actually. And that's just for, and that might just be because it's via Zoom. And I find so visually that is quite,
Training.
record these sessions via Zoom, and it does sometimes take quite a lot of bandwidth. So it's funny. There's a perpetual back to the thing of a life balance that everyone tries to create for themselves, where you're sitting on a Swiss ball, continually going, oh, a bit more of this, oh, a bit less of this, oh, I'm balanced, oh, it's tipped over, it's tipped. Um, and that takes me to the thought that actually, for anybody in a non-working, but particularly in some sort of working space, be it your own, your self-employment, or employed by somebody else,
Mm.
there's something really important about being able to access the accommodations that you need and being able to ask for them. And although it might sound ridiculous, the skill of asking an employer for accommodations is not that dissimilar to asking yourself for accommodations. You kind of have to identify your needs
Yes.
and then be willing to meet those needs. So it sounds certainly, Nick, like in many ways now with your lovely heated chair.
A lovely heated chair in my nice little corner with my little pandas and my polar bears and my brown bear. And I have made myself a proper little space here that does feel safe and it does feel comfortable and it does feel that there's some place that I can give myself from. I think that's where that comes down to, somewhere that you can give yourself from.
Ooh, that's a beautiful note to end on, I think. There's something about being, yeah, safe and comfortable, but then able therefore, from that secure base, to share yourself in a way that makes sense to you, that feels valuable to you, and that is a good use of your skills, talents, and passions.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nick King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicalsdon'tjugglechainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.